All right, it's officially basketball season. The NBA tipped off on Tuesday. College basketball media days are almost done, and Illinois basketball has its first exhibition Saturday against St. Francis. And the return of college basketball season for us here at Illini Inquirer means the return of more Mike LaTulip podcasts and content. And this year, we're kind of happy to have more of a formal partnership with Mike, and we announced that earlier this week. And Mike will join us for a weekly podcast, do a VIP film room breakdown for us to help us understand the what's, the whys of what's happening on the court. And we're starting all of that today with a look ahead to the season. And Mike, let's go, man. Pumped to have you on board. Looking forward to a lot of fun talking ball, and we should be a really, really exciting Illini basketball season yet again.
Well, I'm fired up, man. I can't thank you all enough for allowing me to come on weekly. I looked forward to it. And whenever I got the text from you last year, it was midway through the second half, and you just would hit me up and say pod, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. It didn't matter if it was 1 a.m. or midnight. I didn't care. I was hopping on because I love our conversations, and we're obviously diving into a team that has a lot of excitement around it. A team that coming off a great year last year. I know all of us kind of had the taste in our mouths from how it ended, but the full picture of it is a beautiful picture. And it's one that I think this team is continuing to build on. They've added some pieces here in the offseason that via the portal, via recruiting, I think they've done a great job, not only just finding pieces, but finding pieces that make sense. And I think each one of these guys that they've added brings something to the table. And that's what you want out of a team is, it's not about just going to get guys, right? It's what guys can we get and how can we utilize their abilities, to push forward and to create a more cohesive unit. So give Brad and the staff a lot of credit. They've done a heck of a job there.
Yeah, and this week on the VIP film side, we're going to do some of the new additions to this team and what they can add. The guys from the transfer portal, which I think are going to be really interesting pieces to add to this roster. So we'll do that here in a little bit. So if you're a VIP member, look forward to that. But I do want to shout out, hey, thanks to your wife for allowing me to, text you and have you on to like 1 a.m. some nights. And no, the fans love it, man. And all our listeners and subscribers love it. So we're really pumped to have you back. So let's talk about this season, because Kofi Cockburn's return obviously changed expectations after all that flirtation with the draft and even the transfer portal. We're seeing the preseason polls come out, and boy, it's nice to see Illinois towards the top of these things again. Unofficial media poll in the Big Ten had him finishing third in the Big Ten, 3 out of 28 votes, had him to pick to win the league. One was myself and Derek Piper, had Illinois at the top. They're ranked number 11 in the AP preseason poll. And while some Illini fans might get upset with some of those and say, disrespect my team, it's nice to be disrespected when you're towards the top of these things. Those are exciting for the program to be in that discussion yet again.
No question. And I was talking to a few people the other day, and 11 sounds about right. And when I say sounds about right, I think they're better than the 11th, being the 11th team in the country. But you also got to think, how is the AP going to vote? And in my opinion, if the AP put them top 5, I would have been shocked, just because everybody gets fixated on the losing Ayo aspect of it. So I didn't expect voters to really push them into the top 5. And then I kind of thought that if they dropped past 15, that wouldn't make sense either. So 11 kind of sounds about right. But you hit the nail on the head. There's just a lot of exciting pieces to this team. Starts with the two guys, with Andre Curbelo and Kofi Cockburn. But I'd be remiss to not mention Trent Frazier, because he's been a massive part of this turnaround, quite honestly. But both these guys, Curbelo and Cockburn, in my opinion, are both. I'll say this: I've been bullish on Andre Curbelo for a long time, and I think his name gets thrown around in terms of the best point guard in the Big Ten, or potentially best point guard in the country. Andre Curbelo is one of the best players in the country. And I say that, and that's not me being a homer. That's not me bleeding orange and blue. You can't find a guy in college basketball who has a better feel for the game. You just can't. And what we saw on display last year was him as a freshman coming off the bench, a role that I'm sure he had never played before. He's always had the ball in his hands from the second the ball tips. So to see him come into that type of role and just completely embrace it and be himself, really. And then when Ayo goes down for 3 games, you start to get a sneak peek, like, whoa, this is special. And then, all the things that I'm seeing and hearing out of Ubben, I mean, it's going to be a heck of a year, man.
It sounds like enjoy him while you have him, which is great, man. I mean, you want your guys to have success and go to the NBA, and he's obviously got to improve some things, especially the jumper and all of that. But they do have one of the best duos in the country. I want to get back into that, Mike, but let's start here. You do lose one of the best players in the country that's now on the Chicago Bulls roster, and you lose a guy that I thought could have taken a big leap this year. And I think Adam Miller will be a really good player at LSU. And I thought he bought into his role last year. Obviously wanted a different role as a sophomore, probably the ball in his hands a little bit more. What does Illinois lose with those two, as well as Giorgi Bezhanishvili? I don't want to run past him without mentioning him. What do they lose by losing those guys?
I think you mentioned it. Those are 3 guys that were, I mean, it sounds weird to say bought in after a guy transfers, but you couldn't watch a game and say that Adam Miller wasn't bought in into what his role was. But starting with Ayo Dosunmu, it goes without saying. Sometimes it's tough because I feel like when you say that a team is going to be better than they were last year as a 1 seed with a guy that's, according to some outlets, was a national player of the year and played like it. It's almost like people get caught up in this isn't anything against Ayo. This is the sign of a really great program. This is what happens, when Jalen Brunson leaves and then you bring in like a Colin Gillespie, or there's a lot of different examples about it. Like, Frank Kaminsky leaves Wisconsin and then you have Ethan Happ. It's, good programs tend to reload like that. And this is a sign of, like I said, a great program. So with Ayo, you do lose some of that. Yeah, I thought he was people fed off his confidence. I thought that was part of the turnaround. I thought he showed that his freshman year, and then continued to expound upon that and grow with that as he got older. And guys really followed him and followed his confidence. Where, hey, ball's in my hands at the end of the game, it's a wrap, like it's over. And I think all those guys bought into that type of mentality. And there's a lot to be said about that. I do think they've ushered in some other guys now that have that same type of dog mentality where it's like, hey, if we're up here at the end of the game, we're stepping on your throat. It's over. There are guys on this team that possess that. And, and then you look at a guy like when you talk about Ayo finishing those games, right? And that becomes the big question mark this year, is who that becomes. I think that the natural answer is Andre Curbelo, because I do think that he is much more of a natural scorer than people even realize. But closing the game, I mean, you got, we'll do the film later, but I mean, Plummer's done it. He's hit big shots. He's not necessarily a guy you want to go breaking dudes off the dribble, but he's made big shots before in big moments. So, having experience doing that is huge. But I'll go back to Adam Miller. I thought he was fantastic defensively, and just really accepting his role. He kind of took on the Trent identity where it's like, hey, by the end of the year, like, I'm not getting screened. It's just not happening. And that's credit to Trent, because when you see a guy like that every single day who's doing it, you're like, man, I got to stop running into screens. But I thought Adam was, he was up and down with his outside shooting. I think he's probably a little bit better shooter than what he showed last year. Not saying he shot a terrible percentage, but I thought he had a few open ones that probably go if he's a little bit more confident. And then Giorgi, I mean, how about Giorgi? I know he didn't check into any of the preseason games, but he's wearing a Nuggets jersey. He's a guy that over the years, energy is really the first thing that you think about with him, and he's vocal. And there's a lot to be said about that. You talk about the defensive end, especially. I mean, anytime they're showing a Giorgi clip, or Giorgi scores a basket and the camera pans to him as he's running down the floor, like, he's barking, he's yelling. And if you don't have guys that are naturally like that, then you can kind of take for granted a voice like Giorgi has. But I do think that these other pieces that they've had, because Ayo was the way he was, because Giorgi was the way he was, and because of some of the things that Adam Miller did, I think it sets up this next wave of people stepping in to contribute, to be like, oh no, this is what we do at Illinois. So I do think that you do lose a few pieces, but I do think you reload in those areas.
Yeah. Oh, let's talk about the two superstars here. And I'm willing to say Curbelo is that in college basketball already. And a lot of national media, like I was talking to Mike DeCourcy at Big Ten Media Days, and he's like, I didn't know everybody else thought Andre Curbelo was great because I thought I was on an island as, hey, this guy could be one of the best players in the country. And then Jeff Goodman puts him on his All-American first team, right? So expectations are high for him. What is his next steps as a player, and what is Kofi his next steps in a third season that most of us probably didn't think was going to happen at Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with Curbelo. We've talked about this before. There are a few guys that, you know, you're not even willing to get up and go to the fridge to go get a drink when they're on the floor. I mean, over the years for me, that was Steph, that was Jimmer, that was Ja Morant. I'd watch all of his games, and Curbelo's the same way. Like I'm watching the screen because you may miss something unbelievable, but you know, going beyond just what he's able to do and the flash of it. I always go back to these guys. Like, some people can see things and say that they're flashy, but when you really break down, maybe I'll put on one of these film breakdowns. But there was a pass that he made in the Penn State game at home. It was a behind the back pass right under the basket to Ayo. And if you look at it, it's like, oh, there's Curbelo again going behind the back. But it was really the only pass he could make. And he can do it so confidently that it unlocks completely different angles on the court for him to deliver passes. And part of it is guys don't throw it because guys aren't confident throwing it, but he can do that. I think the biggest thing with Andre Curbelo this year, and you know, you hear the rumblings, you know, out of practice that he is shooting it well. And I think case in point, he was a 73% free throw shooter at the line last year, but it looks good. Like, it's not broken. He has rotation. He has good lift. And I'm a firm believer that as he starts to add that to his game, like Jeremy, I'll say this, and this is not, I'm not speaking in hyperbole. If he can shoot, if he's over 35% from three this year and shows that he can do it off the bounce, off catch and shoot, adding to like the other things that he does in his game, where he showed he can guard towards the end of the year. He was a pest on the ball. He's unbelievable in ball screen situations. I don't think it's out of the question to think he could be a lottery pick.
Yeah, I texted you texted me that, and I said, Ricky Rubio, right? He has some of that in his game. Like, Ricky's a little bigger, right? But like, he's got some of that to his game if he can hit 30% plus.
And here's the thing, you look at typically how guys get qualified out of the NBA is he has this, he has that, but he doesn't have this. You know, he has this, he has that, but he doesn't have these two things. With Andre Curbelo, like, where are the holes in his game when, if he can develop, and he has it, it's not developing, it's about being confident in his outside shot. If he has that, he makes better than anybody in the country. He showed that he's a more than capable defender, making guys uncomfortable. He's unbelievable in ball screen situations, obviously offensively, and that's the NBA. If you're a ball handler and you can be a maestro in ball screens, both offensively and defensively, there's a place for you. And then you factor in, I mean, he is incredibly athletic. I think one of the more underrated part of his games, like, we felt like, oh yeah, like the dunks and stuff, but it's more just like his lateral movement, like his twitchiness, like he has all of that. And you start breaking it all down, you're like, I don't know. And this class is going to be a little less loaded than the previous draft class. So I think that could end up playing in his favor. You know, lottery, I think, is like his ceiling, but I don't think it's out of the question to think that he can certainly be a first round draft pick if he adds that part of his game. But here's the thing, you're a facilitator like Andre Curbelo. It becomes a little bit more of a decision. You start scoring the ball a little bit more, it's hard. Now you're really like, all right, I got to keep guys, I'm a facilitator. Like, I make guys better. So how are you compartmentalizing that? Like last year,
like
finding that balance. That's going to be the biggest challenge for Andre Curbelo this year. Because I'll be honest, I fully expect, and he's fully capable of doubling his scoring output from last year. I think he's going to be north of 17, 18 points a game. You know, it was 21 minutes a game last year. And a lot of that was just late that kind of pushed him over the 20-minute a game mark. But when you talk about his per 40 numbers being whatever they were, 16 and a half and 8 and 7, and that's with Ayo. So I think he's in a position to have an incredible year. And I do think a guy, I'll dive into Kofi here as well. Big Ten Player of the Year candidate, National Player of the Year candidate. It's crazy to be talking about. I mean,
it's just amazing how much he impacts everything they do, Mike. Like, Ayo changed the program, right? Him coming here changed the program. Their numbers defensively, offensively, rebound, everything changed when he got here. And you get that for a third year. Like, I never thought that was going to happen. And you get it for a third year. And it just automatically makes you think, yeah, the floor of this team's fifth because of that one guy. And then you add all the other pieces around it to add to the ceiling. Like, he is just a complete eraser potentially for Purdue and Michigan, right? And just there's a bottom half of the Big Ten. You can't compete against Illinois sometimes because of that guy. He's so valuable. Like, he's such a valuable player that we can poke holes in his game. As a college basketball player, he's got the chance to establish himself as one of the most impactful Illini of all time. He already kind of has, but like, he's in that pantheon after this year because there's few guys that have made an impact on winning as much as he does. And he's got the stats and the highlights with dunks and everything and the dominance to do it. But I know the holes in his game for the next level, but I don't care about that if I'm an Illinois guy right now.
No. And the thing with Kofi, I think when you really look at his game, I don't expect, I think he went up 4 points a game from his freshman year to his sophomore year. I don't expect that type of jump this year. But I do think the biggest challenge for Kofi is consistency is good. Don't get bored with consistency. I think sometimes it's like, oh, I'm really dominating the college game. How can I expand it? No, you're dominating the college game because of what you do currently. So if you start mixing in 15-foot jumpers and trying to attack off the dribble from the wing, like, you're going away from what made you dominant. And I think we always talk about, when you talk about the best players of all time, the GOATs in the NBA, you talk about Jordan, you talk about LeBron. Some people will probably throw Kobe in there. The older people will say it's the ring, so it's Bill Russell. No one ever mentions Shaq, but people mention Shaq for being the most dominant player. And I think that's where Kofi is in terms of college basketball. Like, he is a dominant player. And I think he can really take his game to another level of, he was 7 free throw attempts a game last year, and that ain't changing this year. And you go from about 67% your freshman year to 50, 55, 53 last year. I mean, that he's shooting he shot a third of their free throws last year. So you look and say, man, we're 68% from the free throw line. Well, when a third of it is 55%, you're going to get pulled down.
Well, and think about all the close games they can have, and Ayo, bails you out sometimes at the end of games. Like, if you make those free throws, it might not be that close. I agree with you, Mike. I don't think he needs to go out there and shoot a bunch of 15-footers. Like, I don't think he has to make free throws, but how's he going to make an impact in the NBA? It's as this physical, imposing rebounder, helping in ball screens, improving some lateral quickness as much as he can, being better defensively, but it's dominating in the post. It's dominating in the glass and potentially doing that for 8 to 12 minutes. Like, I don't think he's going to start shooting 15-foot jumpers and making a lot of them for one, but I just don't think that's going to make him go from second round pick to lottery pick. Like, I just don't think that's happening for him.
No, it's not. And you look at, there's plenty of use cases for it, where guys want to say, oh, okay, I'm done with college. I played a certain way. I'm going into the NBA. I got to play a different way now. Go back and look at Brook Lopez. Look at Brook Lopez now, and look at Brook Lopez's first 6 seasons in the NBA, where he took, I think, 3 3-pointers. Like, that was who he was in college, and that's what got him to the NBA. Yeah, there's certain holes in Kofi's game. It sounds crazy saying that for a National Player of the Year candidate, but that's almost encouraging. At the same time, like, there are things for him to get even better at, and forget the 15-footers and forget, doing things on the perimeter. Like, he needs to be a better ball screen defender, period. Like, that's part of the reason that Illinois was sitting at home watching the Sweet 16 last year. And Loyola knew that. Like, they were going to put him in as many ball screen situations as possible. And I thought it was the issue at the beginning of the year, and I thought he got better at it, and then he regressed, in that round of 32 game, because I've always said with ball screen defense, when you're the guy that's they call it sinking, right? Or somebody call it veering, where guy comes off on a ball screen, and you're not trapping, you're not hard hedging, you're just kind of sinking. And if you don't sink with any activity, guys can make passes over you, guys can pull up and don't feel uncomfortable. I thought Giorgi did a decent job of it, where like he's in the middle and he kind of makes you think a little bit, like, oh man, like should I throw that? And like the activity goes,
madman throwing his hands around like that.
Yeah, and it sounds crazy, but really that's all you're trying to do is deter the offensive player from being extremely comfortable with their decision that they're making. Like that's, if I can come off and just say, well, Krutwig's going to be right there, and I'm just going to load it up in my right hand and throw it over my shoulder, and he's going to lay it in. Like they got into a rhythm that way. And sometimes in those single elimination games, like it's hard to stem the tide. It's really hard.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Nana Aglu and just all my appreciation for him in those, right? Like that's the guy I'm thinking of waving his hands. I always compared him to the guy outside of the car sale, the floaty arm guy. Like,
yep.
That's how Nana was in those ball screen or slip back situations.
That's how he was. And then, just as I'm making the comment about Andre Curbelo about, the NBA is ball screens. And that's part of the reason we can talk about, developing a 15-footer. I'll be honest, I don't think the NBA cares about that. Yeah. But the NBA does care if you can't guard a ball screen, because it ain't Braden Norris coming off a ball screen. It's Damian Lillard and Steph Curry and, the best NBA players and the best professional basketball players in the world. So if you're not, what's that?
From 28 feet.
From 28 feet. So like, if you can't at least make do, because here's the reality. Like it's not about guarding those guys or getting switched on them or playing one-on-one, because even Rudy Gobert can't do that. Rudy Gobert is the defensive player of the year, and Steph and Damian Lillard cook him if he gets switched onto them. So it isn't about all these other aspects of your game. It's being good at what is required of you in the NBA, which is be a good ball screen defender. That's why we have you in there. But I do think, getting back to the point, we talked about free throws with Kofi, and I'm going back to his freshman year, because I remember watching this and I was like, he shot 53% last year. I get it. He added, I guess, a little bit of mass, which is even hard. It's hard to add to that frame. But his freshman year, I think people forget, he had a 33 for 40 stretch. 33 for 40 at 7 foot 290. That's insanity. So like, he has it. Like it's the same thing with Andre Curbelo's outside shot. Like he has it. It's just a matter of going up to the line and I'm the guy. I wasn't the post player, so I'm not getting smacked across the arm and hit across the neck and then having to go shoot free throws most times. But just repping that and being confident, like you've done it before. It's not like this is a DeAndre Jordan situation where it's like, man, he's 36% and I'm not sure if we can up that. But even DeAndre did it. Yeah. DeAndre all of a sudden was like 70% one year. So, those are little things that I think he can obviously improve on. We'll talk about a little bit with Omar Payne, but the other thing is just being able to really pick and choose the best times to protect the rim. Like you always want to protect the rim, but we talked about this before where, you can't be the guy every single time going for the weak side block, because your guy's going to get an offensive rebound. And if you don't give your other defenders a chance to come sink and fill, you're leaving your team in a tough spot. And he did that a few times last year. A couple of times he sent it into the stands and like killed one of the cutouts. But, other times you're hurting your team in that regard. So, he can take that to another level. His ball screen defense, knowing when to really be that rim protector from the weak side. There's a lot of stuff for a guy that is a National Player of the Year candidate. Like there's a lot of stuff for him to improve on. And if he improves on that, this team gets a lot better.
Yeah, I just want to repeat, like he got so much better on the post last year with his moves, became even better rebounder. So I want to mention those positives. But the other thing is 5 assists all of last year, right? Like in this offense, especially with more shooters around him, Mike, it feels like that's an area. I don't mind if Kofi's takes on a double team. Like he can score, he can get to the free throw line and do that. But it felt like there were some opportunities out there that, you can find a wide open shooter and you got good shooters around you. If a team's collapsing on you, you got to make them pay for it.
Yeah, it's a really delicate balance with those bigs, because what you don't want to do is put it in their head that they have to throw it out every time they get pressure. Because then that's almost working against you, because Kofi's
He wants, right?
Yeah, Kofi's not Aaron Rodgers. So it's not like he's going to pinpoint every guy every single time. And then you don't want to just have wasted possessions, because here's the reality. Like, if Kofi gets a double team, it's probably still advantage Kofi. Like dead serious. And I think you're better off with him going to his right shoulder and putting up a 6-foot hook shot over two guys than having him try to like thread a cross court pass. But there are other ways to get into it. Like there's, if you can do split screen action on the strong side, a lot of times you want to clear out for Kofi to give him space, but even some split screen action can give him some easy looks. And by split screen, I mean, you have Kofi on the right block. And then in the right corner, you have a guy, and on the right wing, you have a guy. And on the enter, the guy on the right corner is coming up to set a screen for the guy in the wing. And then you just have some action guys can cut off of it. But honestly, like keeping it simple with Kofi is probably the best way to go about it, in my opinion. It's like, hey, dude, you're a beast.
Ain't broke.
You get it down there, it's a wrap. Like, and you don't need him to, because what's really the difference? If you start telling him to be wary of that, what does he go from 5 assists to 14 assists?
Right. You're right.
Like, and if that's sacrificing his potency underneath the basket, then, it's kind of a net negative. So I think in that regard, you look back at, and you touched on it, like he was much more efficient last year. And I think part of that had to do with our guy, Andre Curbelo. And Ayo was great with those lobs, and he started to get so much more high percentage shots. I think off the top of my head, I think he was around 54% from the field his freshman year, which is actually kind of insane to think about. That's insanely low for what he should be. And then last year, I think he was in the, mid to high 60s, which is really where he should be, because all of his shots should be from about, 8 feet and in. So, we can talk for days about those two guys for sure. But, I expect both of them to be right up there, first team all Big Ten, and really probably in the conversation for National Player of the Year. At least one of them will be, that's for sure.
Mike, he had 78 dunks last year. I don't think you saw 78 dunks in your 4 years here at Illinois.
Yeah, no, there's no chance. There's no chance I did.
Oh, that's amazing. All right, let's talk about some of the glue guys, and like, you don't want to overlook this. The returns of Trent Frazier, DeMonte Williams, Jacob Grandison. It might sound boring, but I kind of go out, hey, those are your next 3 guys on this team. Like Alfonso Plummer is going to be a microwave scorer, right? Like Omar Payne will get into, and Coleman, Hawkins, and Austin Hutcherson as X-factors. But those 3 guys are so important, Mike, to bring him back. What do they give Illinois outside of just being 23-year-old guys on the court?
Yeah, I mean, I always sing the praises of Trent Frazier in terms of his adaptability. It's pretty incredible to go from being really the guy his freshman year, and then being able to take a back seat to guys like Ayo, to guys like Andre Curbelo when you're a really good player in your own right. But the maturity of Trent Frazier to go from, okay, I'm not going to be leading us in field goal attempts. I'm not going to be leading us in points. Like, where is my bread buttered? And it's the defensive end, and knocking down open shots. And he's done that, last year. He obviously did it at a high level on both ends of the floor. But I think he's become such an unbelievable defender. I think he'll be right up there for Big Ten Player of the Year. Now that Morcell's out of the conference. But I think he'll be right up there with a lot of those guys for all Big Ten defensively. But I think people forget, man, he was honorable mention all Big Ten last year.
Yeah.
Like he was right there. Like I think it's not out of the question where if he has another solid year, and even increases his output a little bit, I don't think third team all Big Ten's out of the question for Trent Frazier. And I think he's that well respected by his peers, maybe not Hunter Dickinson, but certainly by his peers, by opposing coaches. I think all of them kind of see what he brings to the table. But it's going to be interesting to see where he falls into offensively. Like, I mean, Alfonso Plummer is a gunner. So it'll be interesting to see where, how that shot distribution gets broken up. You got to think that Curbelo and Cockburn are going to be the 2 guys that are leading the team. And then from there, it becomes, it becomes extremely interesting. But Trent's a guy that I can't say enough about in terms of how he's really embraced being that kind of culture guy. Underwood talks about being an everyday guy. But talking about Jacob Grandison too, like his emergence last year, and I think it ends up being one of the questions for this team this year, like who's going to be the guy that emerges.
Because let's remember, he barely played in the non-conference, and then he becomes the switch, right? Like you put him in the starting lineup and everything kind of fell into place with DeMonte coming off the bench. Like the roles just kind of settled in after that.
Yeah, I'll take it a step further. He not only barely played, but when he played, it didn't look good.
No.
Like it wasn't one of those things where it was like, here's a guy that's showing flashes. It was just kind of like, I kind of got to get him out. And then I think the Penn State game really changed things for him. You're talking about a guy that scored at Holy Cross. Like that was his role. And I got to give him credit too. You go from coming into kind of a very unique role that you've really never played, and it takes time. And I think that's the thing you got to think about for freshmen. That's the thing you got to think about for guys that are transferring in that may have had a different role, like an Austin Hutcherson. Like there's a lot of guys that have had roles, or the role that they will have on this Illinois team is not a role that they've had in the past. And, we expect them just to be like, hey, what are you doing? Be your best self. But there's a process that you have to go through. But you look back at the emergence of this team last year, and it kind of coincided with Jacob Grandison entering the starting lineup. I mean, they're 15-1 before that Loyola game, but 15-2 when he was in the starting lineup. And I think he just added so much to this team. Honestly, does a lot of the things that DeMonte Williams does, but he's 3 inches taller, and you're not at a disadvantage defensively. And he's such a good cutter. He shot 42% from 3. I mean, he is, and I think I tweeted it last year, but I was like, you go back and look at every team that's won a national championship or has won a Big Ten championship, like they have a Jacob Grandison. And I think he's another guy too that I don't think gets enough credit. Not only for just owning his role that he plays, but Jacob Grandison has game. I think people realize, like, I'm talking off the bounce. Like that dude has game. It's just, it's where does that fit into this particular team? So you got to always give the kid credit for that. So, he was amazing coming on last year, and I expect him to obviously probably play more of a natural position this year at the 3. I'm somewhat on the Coleman Hawkins trend. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see Coleman Hawkins start at the 4. And then you look at that lineup and it's like, whoa, you're going Curbelo, Frazier, and then 6'6" Grandison, 6'10" Hawkins, 7-foot Cockburn, and you got some versatility there with Hawkins. But yeah, I love what he was able to do last year. 42% from 3, 22 for 23 from the free throw line, 95%. Only reason why he wasn't up there in the Big Ten, because I don't think he shot 2 a game. But I mean, that's just dependable. It's consistent. It's you don't really have many Jacob Grandison games where you're like, get him out. Like by the end of the year, it wasn't like, hey, get him off the floor. Like we need somebody else in there. He really embraced that.
I'm looking at his numbers as a starter: 5.5 points, 4 rebounds, two assists, a steal. Shot 55%, shot 41% from 3. Like with all those pieces around him, like that's exactly what you want.
So good.
And I do think like DeMonte obviously took a huge leap last year as a shooter and still did all the little things well. I think we got to make a point here. What great development by the staff. And as you said, buy-in from those guys, because Jacob Grandison was the best player at Holy Cross. DeMonte Williams at one point was a top 50 recruit, right? But like he got confidence enough to shoot that 3 as well as we heard he did in practice all those years. And then Trent Frazier to go from the number 1 scorer, go-to guy in a team, number 2 guy, to accept his role as like the 3rd or 4th scorer, but be a shutdown defender. That says a lot about those guys and this coaching staff kind of getting all those guys to kind of buy into it. It just reminds you of what Tom Izzo, Matt Painter, and Chris Holtman's got going at Ohio State. Michigan had with John Beilein. That's winning formula right there.
That's how you pump out winning seasons. I think you look at, and it's not only just about how these players develop. That's an aspect of it, but it's you have younger guys watching that development. You have younger guys watching like, oh man, DeMonte bought in, Trent bought in. I'd be like, I can't be the sticking out like a sore thumb, being the guy that doesn't buy in. So the buy-in from upperclassmen ends up trickling down to where a lot of these underclassmen are like, no, this is just what we do. We don't complain about our situation. We're kind of unconditional in that regard. But I'll make this point about DeMonte Williams because it's part of a more, I guess, grander point, just from the psychology of shooting the basketball. So let's dive into this because I think it's a point that really doesn't get talked about enough. When you are a guy that shoots limited attempts, when I say limited attempts, I mean 1.5, 2, maybe 2.3 3-point attempts a game. Okay. People don't understand, like theoretically in a perfect world, every shot you shoot should be the same shot. You should have the same mentality shooting that shot. And that's just the way it should be. But I'm here to tell you that it's not. And for most people that are human, when you have limited shot attempts, when you have 1.5 to 2.5, like I just mentioned, the amount of weight that you put in to every shot, when you know it could be your only one, when you know that, after you start 0 for 2, you may not get another one. And you got to sit with that for typically 3 to 4 days. And that's so difficult to do. And I'm saying this more because I thought Andre Curbelo, although he started 3 for 8 last year, he didn't make many more after that. So this is how I always like to break it down. Because the bigger point that I'm trying to make is when you're a limited attempts guy, how you start typically dictates what your percentage ends up being for the season. So let's break it down with DeMonte Williams. Freshman year, 3 for 15. Started 3 for 15. So, and I'm doing 15 as more of like, okay, 2 attempts a game, 7 to 8 games in the season. It's not like your first 10. Freshman year, 3 for 15. Sophomore year, 4 for 15. Junior year, 2 for 15. Right? 23%, 30%, 28%. Senior year, 10 for 15. Right? 55% for the season. Because at that point, if you start that way, you kind of feel like you're shooting with house money.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different psychology. And I bring it back to the grander point of, I think that if Andre Curbelo is going to shoot a high percentage this year, I think a 3 for 4 game in the first 3 games, I think it goes a long way. You can look at it as just one game, but just to paint the picture of the other side of it, now when you talk about volume shooters, right? And this is kind of just making my point. Kendrick Nunn at Oakland, 13 threes a game on average, attempted 13 threes a game. I watched Kendrick Nunn go 0 for 8 to start a game. He finished 5 for 13. But here's the thing. He can shoot himself in and out of a slump in one game. Whereas for other guys, that's, if you're shooting 2 threes a game, you end up shooting, shoot 2 threes a game, 14 threes is over 7 games.
It take you a month.
Yeah, it takes you a month. So that is marinating every day. 3, just went 0 for 2, just went 0 for 2, 1 for 3. These guys that are volume shooters can shoot themselves out of that. Whereas, if you're a lower volume guy, that sticks with you. And great, you're winning games, but everybody wants to do well, and be a guy, because if you make threes, you have a little bit more leash to shoot threes. So it's all kind of like the chicken or the egg thing. But, I go back to Klay Thompson. I make this point all the time with guys that, that are kind of anomalies in that regard. Because you could say oh, no, you could start off the season not shooting well and turn it around. Yeah, sure you can. Back in 2016, 2017, Klay Thompson started the year 3 for 28. Okay, he finished the season 43%. 18-19, he started the year 5 for 36. Klay Thompson, one of the best 3-point shooters ever, 5 for 36. And, he starts 5 for 36. You know what the following game was? I think you do. It's against the Chicago Bulls. And he went 14. And he went 14 for 24. So, you go from being 18% from 3 to 32%. And all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I'm good. Because you can shoot yourself out of that in one game. And those guys know that. And that's why it's just, very, very important for guys like DeMonte Williams and Andre Curbelo to truly challenge themselves to treat each shot like its own shot and shoot it with confidence each time. And don't let the 0-for-2 dictate your next shot. Don't let the, your previous game where you struggled dictate your next shot. Cause that's the hardest thing to do as a shooter is not think about the previous result. So you train yourself to do that. So that's what I'll be looking for this year, especially with those two, is to see how the start that they have from through the 3-point line and what they finish with. Cause typically it coincides.
That's great stuff, man. Great research on that too. That's why we have you on here. All right, let's talk about some of these new additions and talk about volume 3-point shooters. Alfonso Plummer certainly adds that. When you get a guy, this isn't the normal, but he's gotten 11 threes in a game before. But he's had many games of 4+ threes. And you think about how that can carry an offense. We've seen Trent Frazier do that at times, not consistently, but he can do that at times, and what it does for you in a game. And then Omar Payne, who thought he was stepping into a starting role after being in the shadow of Colin Castleton last year. Well, he's kind of in the shadow of Kofi Cockburn, but gives Illinois one of the strongest, most talented center rotations they've ever had. So what is the impact of bringing those two guys off your bench, Mike?
I mean, you talk about elite level shot making from Alfonso Plummer. I always like to say there's certain guys that are comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's Alfonso Plummer to a T. And I say that just his ability to get shots off, the shots he's willing to take. And he's done it at a high clip. Like, I mean, we'll watch some of the clips here in the film breakdown, but I mean, I think it's one of the first clips that I have in there for Alfonso. He hit shots that I'm not talking like a handful of players in the Big Ten could make. I'm talking about a handful of players in the Big Ten can even get off. And that opens up so many different things. Cause I'm a big believer of, you got to have one guy on your team that's just like no conscience, like, and cause you want to have a guy that you can kind of like, you'd rather reel a guy back in than be the guy constantly. It's like, hey, no, you can make shots, cause you don't have to tell Alfonso Plummer, like he knows. Yeah, I mean, you'll see some of these shots. I mean, he knows that he's a shot maker, and almost think like J.R. Smith, like one of those guys. It's just like, he shot that. Oh man, it went in. All right, well, he's so good in that regard. And I think the other thing too that with Alfonso is, he dealt with a little bit of dysfunction last year. I mean, Utah wasn't the most functional program. They didn't win a lot of games. And honestly, I think it was pretty impressive to see what Plummer was able to do, because he's not a guy that's like break you down, get shots off. He's a lot more catch and shoot. He's coming off of screens, and he really didn't have a true point guard last year, and was still able to get these different looks. So I think Andre Curbelo unlocks an even different part of his game, being able to get even more of those types of shots off, and his strength is not handling the basketball. Like that's not, he's good when he's like very decisive. I'm shooting this shot or I'm driving to the basket to score. And that's where his bread is buttered. When you start make him make a bunch of decisions handling the ball, that's not his strength. And, I think his freshman year, I think he had 10 assists. We talked about Kofi having 5, Alfonso Plummer at 10. And then last year he had 25, but he had 34 turnovers. He had 10 assists his freshman year and I think 15 turnovers. So he's never been a positive assist to turnover guy. And that's fine because you're not relying on him to handle the ball a ton. And that's what I'm talking about when you have guys and pieces of this team that fit. Like, hey, Plummer, we don't need you to handle the ball because we got one of the best in the country. Like, just do what you do. He had games last year. It's weird because I don't even want to say that he's turnover prone. He is, I guess, when he puts it on the deck and tries to make decisions. But he had 34 turnovers last year, and almost a fifth of those were in one game. In the conference tournament against Washington, he had 6, which really is kind of inexcusable because I don't think he handles it enough to warrant 6 turnovers. It's almost like a couple of Trents earlier in the year. I think he had 2 games of 5, and just kind of like, he should be having 5 turnovers, and he shored it up. But I think Alfonso Plummer is gonna offer so much to this team in terms of tempo, in terms of the types of shots they can get off in transition and secondary transition. he unlocks a lot of that. And I think Curbelo is going to have a blast playing with him because he's just a guy that if you leave him open, it's not even like if you leave him open, if you're guarding him and your hands are down, like it is going up. And part of it is, Illinois fans just got to be okay with, he's not going to make every shot. So there's going to be a few where you're like, but he's also going to have games where he hits 6 or 7 threes. So, that's certainly possible.
He had the open practice, Mike, and it's not just that he makes shots, it's the shots he takes and is able to make, like, and get off, as you said. Like, he caught a ball, turned quick, and elevated and sunk it. And Brad Underwood just looked at us and said, he's going to be a problem. Like, it's just that ability is rare, to be able to get off those shots so quickly. His release is so quick, and the way he can just square up. Like, some guys can't square up as quickly as he does. So he's going to be.
He's got such a good base, and that's always half the battle with guys that can get shots off like that. It doesn't matter where his feet are facing. If his base is loaded, like, he's quote unquote squared up. Like, it doesn't matter where he's at. And I think that makes you so much more dynamic as a shooter, and it makes it easier to come off screens and shoot because you don't have to have your feet facing the basket. You don't have to have your feet squared. You can you just rise up and fix it in the air. And that's kind of what he does because he gets great elevation on his shot. But you mentioned Omar Payne. Omar Payne is a guy, like, the more that you watch his Florida stuff, they did a lot of funky things defensively. They had a bunch of different zone packages they had, but also they cross matched a ton. And when I say cross match, I mean, Tyree Appleby was their point guard, who's about 5'10", 5'11", and a lot of these SEC offenses are so ball screen heavy that in order to prevent you from being at a disadvantage in ball screen situations, they would have Omar Payne guard the point guard, and they would have Tyree Appleby guard the big, so that when they come up to set the screen, they just switch and they're right back into their matchups. Tom Crean actually did it against us in the Big Ten tournament with Yogi Ferrell and Noah Vonleh, and it's a unique. Like, I wouldn't recommend it. I'd just rather have you be good in ball screen coverages, because what ended up happening, and I'm not sure if I put the clips in there, was just, he's playing against Bob Huggins in West Virginia, and like in the Big 12 SEC challenge, and they put Omar Payne on Miles McBride, and Huggins was like, everybody sink to the baseline. Yeah. And Miles McBride went around him and shot a floater off the glass. So they put him in a lot of weird spots. And quite honestly, he is good in ball screen scenarios. He's fantastic offensively in ball screen scenarios. I think I don't know what I'll put his over under at for lobs this year. But I don't know, 25 and a half. It's going to be a lot. And I think what he saw in the SEC compared to what he'll see in the Big Ten is going to be his biggest challenge. Because quite honestly, there weren't many back to the basket bigs in the SEC. And honestly, the clips that you see, he's a rim protector. He's probably better from the weak side than he is just head up. But he got put under the basket a few times by the Jeremiah Tillmans of the world, not to send a shiver down anyone's spine. But I think that's where he makes the next step, and that's where his minutes are really determined. Because, and I'm not talking the difference between playing 5 minutes and 25 minutes. I'm talking about playing 10 or 15, because that's a big difference. And I think
because Jeremiah Tillman's a good big man in college basketball, but Hunter Dickinson and Zach Edey and Trevion Williams are a little bit different.
Trace Jackson Davis, like all these guys, like these, that's the way that I think he can really take this next step, because it's not just this year. Like, this is a guy that's going to be relied upon once Kofi decides to leave, whenever that is. But I'll wrap it up by saying Omar Payne is a guy that really, he knows his limitations. And there's something to be said about that. Like, he's not a guy that's like, man, I'm dying to play on the perimeter. He shot 75% from the field last year because he was JaVale McGee. He set screens, he got lobs, he kept balls alive on the offensive glass. He was a rim protector, kind of the same Kofi syndrome a little bit, where he'll just go and try to get a weak side block. We'll see some of that in the clips, but I do really like what he brings to this team. Like, if he was your starting center and you're having to rely on him this year for 25 plus minutes, I may have like a little bit of pause. But in this role that he's in, I think he's great to back up a guy like Kofi.
Yeah, it's complimentary as well. If
For sure.
you can go maybe big against Purdue if they throw Edey and Williams there together, and feel like you can handle a little bit more with Payne as your backup center. All right, before we get out of here and focus on our VIP film room here, I don't want to talk too much about the freshmen because I don't think we're going to see a bunch of them. We saw some good things from Luke Goody. I think it's nice that as a program you can kind of be patient with those guys now. But I think the two X factors of the season, I kind of lump these guys together, are two guys who have great skill sets, great length, which Illinois could really use at the 4 and the 3 and the 2, potentially, maybe the 1 if Brad Underwood plays Austin Hutcherson there. But Austin Hutcherson and Coleman Hawkins, we saw a little bit of Coleman last year, obviously needs more time to add strength, had that in the offseason. Austin Hutcherson, we haven't seen on a Division I basketball court yet, Mike. So I know Illini fans are excited about what they could be, and the ceilings seem high given their athleticism, skill sets, length. But like, where are you at with those guys? Because they do add something defensively with their length and athleticism, and obviously have some skill sets offensively that these could be the guys that push your ceiling up even higher. Where are you setting your expectations?
I'll start with Coleman Hawkins. I'm really excited about him. I thought last year, and like you always have to factor in freshmen coming in, playing a new role, like a role that you've never really seen yourself in. So you have those bouts with your confidence, and typically your confidence impacts your athleticism. And he's a guy last year, I thought he looked a little robotic. And it's almost like you watch high school highlights and you're like, he looks loose, he's flying around, he's dunking everything. And all of a sudden, he just looked robotic last year. And a lot of that is not having confidence, and then you look at your athletic ability, and I think this year you're going to see him just, it's almost like you see a bucket go in, or you get, I think last year he had a really good block. I forget who it was against, but then all of a sudden the next few possessions, I'm like, hey, he's moving a little bit. Like he was a little bit more, he was a little bit more sure of himself. But I think he's likely the most improved player on this team. I like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see him start at the 4, bump Jacob to the 3, which obviously leaves DeMonte there as kind of the odd man out. But he did that, like DeMonte did that last year.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's going to be, and sorry to cut you off, and we'll talk about Coleman, but that's going to be the interesting thing with me, because I think DeMonte Williams, Jacob Grandison, Trent Frazier, like, hey, I can plug them into the starting role 20, 25 minutes. Like, that's kind of how I have it in my head. But when it comes to rotations, I think it makes sense to have either Coleman or Austin as a starter, because then you get DeMonte off the bench and you get another veteran to go along with Plummer and Payne and, the other guys you have coming off. So that can make a lot of sense. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. But if Coleman gives you confidence, I think that'd be great, because I think he makes you a lot more versatile defensively.
Yeah, and you saw just the toughness last year, and I don't like just defining toughness off of one play, but when he ripped the guy out, when he ripped the ball out of the guy's hands against Baylor as a freshman in like a big game, I love that. Like and he's another guy too as a freshman, and he wasn't asked to do a lot in terms of his in terms of what was required of him, but he had a positive assist to turnover ratio. And I think really anybody, any freshman big man that has a positive assist turnover ratio that's a thumbs up. Absolutely. I think, I think he's one of those guys. I think he'll actually back up a little bit too at the 5. I think there's going to be moments where I think he might start at the 4. And once he gets subbed out, he can circle back in and get Kofi a breather, or get, Omar a breather, depending on, let's say Kofi picks up too early and Omar's in there, like Coleman's going to have to circle back and be that 5-man. So he's going to be counted on for, in my opinion, 18 to 20 minutes a game this year. But when you start breaking down minute distribution, I think everybody wants to look and be like, he's a 15-minute a game guy. He's a 20-minute a game guy. Well, is he? Because, if you look at a starting lineup, there's 200 minutes to be dispersed over a game. Curbelo's 30 plus, Frazier's 30 plus, and Coburn's going to be right around 30. It's about half of your minutes. So now you look at 6 other guys and have to, disseminate 100 minutes to 6 other guys. And it's not all going to be equal. You can't just say like, okay, each guy gets 15, because once a guy gets 20 to 25, that's 5 to 10 for the other guy. So, that's the challenge this year. And then you mentioned, Hutch, I think he's not only a potential X factor, he's the biggest question mark. Yeah. I think out of everybody, when you go from D3 to D1, it's tough because there's just a different type of physicality. And I think that's the one thing that, and I feel for the kid because back injuries are tough and it really limits your ability to just like let it loose. You're super conscious of it. And I think from a physicality standpoint, like that's what he's going to have to overcome playing in the Big Ten. I would actually expect him. He may be my pick. We should do something like this where it's like, okay, who's going to have the exhibition performance that everybody overreacts about? I think it's going to be either like him or one of the freshmen. It's going to be somebody where you're like, oh my God, this guy's going to put up 15 a game in the Big Ten. And
the Benjamin Bossman's Verdonk Award after he had 11 points and made 3 threes. Like that was kind of like, oh my God, look at this kid.
Yeah.
Hey, it was the only thing we had. We just like, I'm not low on him, but I feel like I am the low man on Hutcherson because he's got to come back from back injuries, Mike, which we know is not easy.
Hard.
He's got to make the adjustment from D1 to or D3 to D1 and not just D1, but high major. So that's a way bigger leap than Grandison made. And Grandison struggled early last year. And I know he can do great things in practice, but it's just different in real games with fans in State Farm Center, right? So like all those factors make me say, yeah, it'd be great if Austin Hutcherson can give you 6 points a game to 8 points a game and give you kind of a versatile athlete out there. But as you said, the physicality, just getting your confidence and finding your role on this team of all teams. Like it's a great thing that he's your 8th or 9th man rather than having to count on him as a starter. Like we thought at one point, but I don't know what to expect because we haven't seen it.
I think too, you always got to factor in similar to Jacob Grandison. It's just his role at Illinois was not his role at his previous school. And how do you manage that? Like already when you're battling potential back injuries and you kind of become a guy, and I think this is his game. His game's going to be to utilize his length and knock down open shots and attack closeouts and make good reads. That should be his game, and then do his best to compete at the defensive end. But I really view him as a guy where like any positive production from Austin Hutcherson is just like, it's icing on the cake. I don't think it doesn't make or break your season, but it's certainly a great thing to have. When you're looking at depth, because I always say it, you can look at, hey, we have 10, 11 guys that can really play this year. It's like, yeah, well, it's going to be 7 or 8. It always is. That's just kind of how it always whittles down to, because you can't really you want to get the most out of the guys that you want on the floor. And in order to do that, you're not about to go hockey shifts. You're not going to go 5 in, 5 out, or else, it's kind of you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. So, I think both of those. I think Coleman Hawkins is he's my vote for most improved player this year. The table's set for him to do that. And then Austin Hutcherson, he's just a guy that you look and say, all right, well, let's see what we can get from him. My expectations aren't through the roof because I don't think that's fair to the kid with kind of what he's going through. So, but both good players that I think can help this program in some way, shape, or form.
All right, Mike, as we wrap this up, I think both of us are pretty high on what this team can do. How does this team look different? And then what are your concerns that could keep this team from winning a Big Ten championship or advancing far into the NCAA tournament like everybody hopes they would?
Yeah, I think anybody that was a part of that team last year and the way that ended, it's somewhat of a wake-up call that you got to bring it every day regardless. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to continue to come to practice every day because you feel like you're building towards the Final Four. Everybody's excited. Vibes are great. But just adopting that mentality where you just work with no guarantees. I think that's the next step where these guys really, you go through a loss like that, and then your next step is, all right, let's turn it around. Let's hit the pavement here for the next year. But I think things that they can, I do think they're going to be a better offensive team, which is crazy to say because I think they were 8th in the country last year, according to KenPom. They're going to be in that top 10 range. Defensively is really going to be the question mark. these guys, these new guys, right? Like I think Omar Payne brings a positive to the table defensively, the way he protects the rim. But you look on the perimeter, it's going to come down to how Coleman Hawkins adjusts defensively. Like how does he hold his own in the post? And then these guys in the perimeter, how's Alfonso, Plummer? The thing with Plummer, when you watch his clips at Utah, he's a capable defender if he stays focused. Like that's kind of his thing. He's so anxious to get to the offensive end that he leaks out a little bit, or he kind of he'll give up on a play every now and then. But I think that's where this team can really take the next step. And it's great when you have like that build up year in 1920 where you're like, hey, we could be something. 2021, you deliver on that in terms of being a 1 seed and putting together a very complete season. And then now it's like really like there's plenty of teams that have done that. A lot of teams have had that like 2-year spurt, like, hey, remember, such and such team in like the early 2000s? Like, what was that? And now you're proving that, we are a program. We are a powerhouse program in the Big Ten. So I think there's a lot of different areas that you can look at. Even just diving into more granular details, they were so good protecting the paint last year, forcing tough twos. I think they were top 20 in the country last year in 2-point percentage defensively, which is fantastic. I think their opponents shot 32% from 3 last year, which is great. And I think they'll turn some teams over a little bit more this year. 316th in the country last year in forcing turnovers. So, or I guess in their turnover percentage defensively. And I think that's they'll take another step because I think there's just gonna be more length out there. More hands to get into gaps. I really like Andre Curbelo's ability to I always think about that Iowa game where he was just a pest. Jordan Bohannon looked like he couldn't dribble. But I do think at the same time, he's a guy, we didn't even touch on it for Andre Curbelo, but who's the backup point guard? It's Trent. He's a secondary ball handler, but you can't have the fouls you had last year, Curbelo. Like you can't. Like last year, you could get away with it because you still had Ayo, and the ball handling duties are what they are, and he kind of had them anyways. But any type of absence from Andre Curbelo this year really, really hurts this team. Foul trouble hurts this team. I do think he'll get a more favorable whistle this year. That's just how it goes. As a freshman, it is quick. Like you look like you're in a situation where you're at a disadvantage. Like it's a foul.
The one thing I want to mention, Mike, with that, Andre as a freshman talked more to referees than I've ever seen a freshman talk to referees. Like he was building relationships.
A lot of this.
Yeah. Well, and even like afterwards, like after timeouts, I don't know if people saw this at home because I was one of the only people in the stadium. Like he'd go up to them and talk to them about what's a foul, what's a travel, like what's all this, and building that relationship might pay off as a sophomore, right? Like that you've talked with those guys, you've learned what they're going to call, but also you might've made a little bit of a friend there.
Yeah. I think he approached his, like Luka's very bad at this. Luka is the ultimate, like, kind of making the ref feel like an idiot for every call. But I thought Curbelo approached that with like a genuine curiosity last year, which was really cool to see. And I think that's whether refs want to admit it or not. There's some sort of like subliminal, subconscious where like, refs are humans too. And if they're like, yeah, I really don't like this guy. They'll probably make more calls, but if they really like you, they may give you a pass every now and then. And I think similar to Ayo got last year, I think Curbelo gets that same type of whistle. But I will say with Andre Curbelo, for as much as we can talk about him fouling, like the dude drew a lot of fouls, which is something I think this year too. He'll get even more confidence from his outside shooting because I think he's going to be at the line even more.
Yeah, Mike, if you had to vote, who do you have winning the Big Ten?
Isn't it boring for me to say Illinois?
I came down to Illinois and Purdue. I get why everyone is picking because I'm picking a regular season champion. And I think those two teams are going to be tough to beat 5+ times in the Big Ten, especially with I think the bottom half of the Big Ten is way weaker this year, especially the very bottom. And I just think those teams in a 20-game schedule have a great chance of winning 15+ games. I think Michigan's the most talented team. They also replace a ton. I mean, people talk about replacing Ayo Dosunmu, Franz Wagner, Mike Smith, Isaiah Livers. Like Caleb Houston's probably going to be a lottery pick, and that could be great. He's going to be really good, and I wouldn't want to play them in March. I also think Ohio State should get some consideration here. If they had Dwayne Washington back, I might have had them as like a surprise Big Ten champion. I just think their wings are so good. It's just, I have the question about point guard for them. But I'm picking between Illinois and Purdue, and I went Illinois just because I think Kofi Cockburn can win the head-to-head matchup against Purdue.
I'm with you on that. And I think it's much less of me saying, hey, it's Illinois, and more backing up my reason why it's not some of the other teams. I think Illinois, quite frankly, and you can point to the Ayo thing, but Illinois, and like you said with Purdue, I think Illinois just has the least amount of question marks. They have the point guard play, they have the interior play. They did a fantastic job in the portal. They did a fantastic job recruiting in some solid freshmen. And then these other pieces that they have are primed to emerge. And Houston Michigan just has a lot of question marks in my mind. I'm of the belief that a guy like Hunter Dickinson, he kind of is what he is. I don't expect him to all of a sudden start turning into Dirk. I think whatever he was 14-7 last year. I mean, I think he gets up to 16 this year, but it's similar to Kofi. Like those guys kind of are what they are. They're dominant big men in the Big Ten. But, the Coastal Carolina transfer that's likely going to be a point guard. I know Mike Smith worked out really well for them coming from Columbia. But he's another piece that they add. They have a great freshman class, but there just haven't been many times in the Big Ten. I'm trying to think off the top of my head where it's like, hey, this freshman class led this team to a title. Like it hasn't happened. It's typically with, talent that is pretty well blended with youth, but also some experience as well. And then Purdue's the one where I think, the question marks there. It's going to more center around, in my opinion, their ability to score. I think they're going to be great defensively. They still got Sasha. They still got, Jaden Ivey, I think is obviously going to be a top 10 pick, lottery pick. Zach Edey, it's one thing to just be like the tall, oh yeah, Taco Fall, awesome. Zach Edey's got game. And he played really well for the USA team this summer, or for the Canadian team, right? Yeah. Canadian team. Yeah. So, and then you look at Williams as well. He's another guy that is going to be right up there for first team all Big Ten. And they're tough because to go along with the pieces that they have, they're just a tough team. They're, that's kind of what that program's been built upon. So, and you mentioned Ohio State, they still got EJ Liddell. I really like Kyle Young. I think those guys are solid. They've got another, like you mentioned, a lot of good pieces on the wing. I think that's really the race right there. I'd be surprised to see some of these other teams sneak in there. Maybe, and I'm not talking about Indiana winning the title, but they had a good offseason too. For as tumultuous as it looked for a second, Mike Woodson did a pretty good job with bringing in some of those guys. So my pick's Illinois. My pick was Illinois last year and had the most wins. And I guess the last point that I'll make about, Illinois is I always talk about not having those question marks. I just really like the makeup of their team. I think their pieces blend together so well. Whereas when you look at some of these other teams, it can get kind of clunky in areas, and it's okay, we got to be really good here because we got to make up for this, area that we have. There's just not a lot of holes for this Illinois team. The big question is going to be how these guys assimilate, I guess, and kind of get into, figure out the rotation and figure out minutes and shot distribution. That's something that you can typically figure out pretty early.
Yeah, and I think you got the non-conference where you're gonna be favored in every game. I hope they play Arkansas and Kansas City because that'll probably be their toughest matchup. But you should be able to figure those things out while gaining confidence throughout it, but also get tested. So I think they're going to maybe have a stumble here that you don't want, but in the end, like last year, that could end up being really, really good for them. Well, Mike, I can't wait to see this play out, and we're going to break it down throughout the season. We got our VIP film room coming up of Alfonso, Plummer, and Omar Payne, so check that out. But Mike, can't thank you enough for this first longer but really fun podcast. Appreciate it.
Let's get it going, man. I appreciate it.